Oh, great. Good morning. So this is the summer, as it's snowing outside, Summer Government Accountability Committee, and we are meeting on Zoom today in order to talk about the draft recommendations for strengthening government accountability, and also an addendum or an amendment or a recommendation from Representative Kornheiser that the committee is very interested in taking up as well. So how shall we move forward? Tim, when we finished in the room, you were helping us by going through one at a time, and you've made some updates to the first few. So maybe let's just quick recap on that. And then if you don't mind continuing to help us work through them.
Oh, of course. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel, and Chair Brumsett, would you like me to share my screen so that everybody can see the same text? Oh, sorry.
Is everybody good with that?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay. And Lindsay, I may need certain permission to do so, but no, I think I already have it. Never mind. One moment, please. So please let me know if you are able to see this well enough. And what we have is draft 2.2. And just for reference, I've updated the tracking number in the corner. Let's say version 3, but that's just so that I can modify as we go along and adequately capture any changes without having to flip between various versions of the recommendations. So I believe the committee only got through reviewing and discussing, maybe not in totality, but really touching upon the first 5, which if there are any edits or wanted changes, I went and updated that language here. It wasn't much, but there isn't any highlights or anything like that indicating that there is a new footnote that describes the source of one of the definitions at the beginning. That is roughly the definition of government accountability. We see this as government accountability means. And then, let's see, tweaks to certain sub-bullets under the first recommendation having to do with the legislative provision of a general oversight function is needed, and as well as a change to that title itself, inserting the word provision there, or legislative provision, that is, qualifying that type of oversight. And sorry, I'm just skimming through this here. Moving of one of the other recommendations into a footnote of, let's see, 1B here having to do with the auditor's recommendation, or sorry, the selectively reviewing the findings and recommendations of audits conducted by the state auditor, federal agencies, and examining whether those findings have been implemented. And let's see, I believe those are the most substantive changes that were made, but I'd be happy to go through co-chairs and just kind of maybe read off, if you'd like, the first 5 or the others. I'm not exactly sure what level of detail you'd like me to kind of go into.
Let's hold for 1 minute, because sure. I think that Wendy, didn't you have a couple of changes in those first 5? Are you good with the way they were made, or just so?
I had a question, or just a question, possibly a comment. Number 4, when we say increasing consistency and accountability in rulemaking, is rulemaking the only operation that would refer to?
Good question. I think that this specific recommendation is truly about rulemaking, unless we want to add something else in there and then drop in rulemaking, it's up to the committee. Maybe once we go through more of them, it will become obvious if we want to put something else, another letter under this and drop the in rulemaking.
Yeah, I guess what I was thinking was the purpose of this obviously is to keep track of what we're doing and make sure it gets done. And I thought there might be legislation that requires certain actions that aren't technically rulemaking, and we would still want the Legislative Council to list and share the list of those actions, but I don't know the words for what those actions would be.
I think some of those
Emily has her.
things are further down, so let's see and go from there, because I agree, there are a lot of things that we want to increase consistency and accountability in, and I think they're included already, but if not, then we could put them in here and get rid of in rulemaking. Let's see what we think as we move forward and come back to this point at the end. Is that okay with everybody?
It's fine with me. There are hands up, but
Okay.
nodding. And then on
Works for me.
okay, number 5. I thought in the detail portion, not the overall on the first page, that yeah, what you have on the screen now, I think, is the first page. It's on page 3 of the draft, the bottom of the page. Information technology support is needed. And I would like to suggest that the official summary of adopted legislation be prepared and available within 30 or 60 days of adoption. I just, I haven't talked to anybody about if 30 days or 60 days is reasonable. I think 30 days would be ideal, because then we could notice any errors of omission in legislation earlier. So that's one recommendation I would have under that. The other recommendation is to centralize regular reporting, such as designating the Human Resource Office, or whatever we call it, sorry, I'm new, to report on personnel vacancies and turnover for all agencies. So for example, in the Economic Development Committee, we've asked the Labor Department and other departments to let us know how they're doing on staffing and percentage of vacancies. And I think rather than asking each agency individually, we should go to the source that I would hope has all of that information, and have a regular report from the administration on staff vacancies and turnover, because both of those items to me are performance measures, can be seen as performance measures.
So I want to hear from everyone. I know that we have lots of hands. I just, as a response, this number 5, information technology support is needed to ensure all reports and deadlines are easily accessible to the public. My thought here was just a really simple, like on a website that would be called government accountability, right? Or something that's in our ledge website overall, that it wouldn't just be reporting to the committees, it would be there as well, and whether or not there was an IT way to do that, but that could be a big project. So I'm not sure. Once it's done, the big project, then we could say that it has to be up on our website within 30 days whenever there's a report put out or a deadline, right? Is I think what you're saying. I'm just concerned that IT might see that as we have to figure this out within 30 days. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I did. Well, on the first one about the summary of adopted legislation, that is a ledge council function and not necessarily an IT function. I mean, the IT part is just to get it up on a website. So that suggestion could certainly be under some other item. Centralizing regular reporting, I would think that would be an IT function, but also an administrative function. It's not necessarily putting it on a website, but actually just getting the information, so that then we can figure out what to do with it. But I'm okay if these things are discussed or considered under different sections, but I think they each would help accountability.
Okay, I get it. Thank you. And let's go to everybody. It looks like Emily, then Irene, then Josie.
Thanks. I think it's really important for each section to be as specific as possible in order to retain its power as a recommendation. So I hope that we can keep the rulemaking specific to rulemaking. And then if we think there's something not included, make that a separate item. I also, and maybe making the, and then just sort of to follow on to that, making the IT support a little more specific about reports and deadlines. I think it's important that that's actually, we're talking about reports and deadlines due to the legislature. And so if we have specific reporting such as HR vacancies, which I think would be an interesting thing to learn about, again, I would consider that a different item because that's adding a new reporting requirement. It's not about centralizing existing reporting requirements. I'm also nervous about putting anything in these recommendations that we haven't actually heard from the folks who would need to be doing the work on this. So I think we heard about the internal reports and deadlines from Legislative Council and JFO. If we're going to move into something like HR recommendations, which again, I think is like a really interesting, helpful idea, and I think would be great to learn. I think we need to actually hear from the HR department in the administration to see if that's even something that they do collect right now, so we can understand sort of the implications of that. And seems like a slightly separate project from this, which is about like sort of internal processes rather than external reporting into our internal processes. I'm not sure that was as clear as it could have been because 8 o'clock in the morning meetings are hard.
I think, can I respond to that? On the centralized regular reporting, the HR is just an example. I think it is important for us to say, be as efficient as you can in reporting, and with the goal being to have less burden on the departments that are line departments, essentially, that have outside responsibilities and program responsibilities, and indicate that we are encouraging processes that minimize work and maximize the result, which to me means go to the source of the data. So that's an example. We could probably find other examples. Or I don't know if we have time to talk to HR folks, probably not.
Thanks, that makes more sense to me.
Okay, let's those are all good points. I mean, I think that this document we are just making recommendations to the Government Operations Committee. So just like with the recommendations that Representative Kornheiser sent to us, this is another area where maybe we could say, for example, and list, HR, but that they would have to take testimony before they could move forward on that. So anyway, I don't want to answer all the questions that come up because I feel like, am I the right person to do that? So let's just keep moving through the hands, and then we should all open up our thing and maybe have a conversation, which is hard on the internet. So on YouTube. So I'm sorry. Okay, Irene, I think you're next.
Thank you. My first comment has to do with the actual summary of recommendations on page 1. I just saw them and it struck me that not all of them start with a verb. And, if we're asking people to act, I think it's really important that number 1 say something like provide a general oversight function from the legislature, add a program, increase consistency, ensure IT support, broaden communication, and so forth. Just because a document this long already is kind of daunting, I think, for anybody to read and act upon. So, and then of course those changes would flow through into the document. That's my introductory comment. Thanks.
Great. Okay, Josie.
Oh, my question was about the IT, and just, is that something that is going to incur an expense that the IT department perhaps has not budgeted for? So that's just my thing of, because I don't know if centralized reporting exists, and if it doesn't, is there a cost component to it? That's all.
Can I jump in on this? Because I actually asked a question about this at the Joint Fiscal Committee yesterday. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Or 2 days ago, whenever that was. So the Joint Fiscal Office has sort of begun the process of submitting their budget recommendations, and this would not be part of the Joint Fiscal Office budget recommendations, but it's fits into the broader scheme, which is basically once this legislation passed, it would then be incorporated into whatever the budget recommendations from the legislative branch are, and are all, like, you know, compared to the grand scheme of spending that all branches of government engage in, these are fairly small tweaks that usually there's like an extra fund that's sort of held for these kinds of things, like reports and stuff.
Thanks for that. I didn't know.
Thanks. And Randy.
Going back to the issue of information technology support, my sense is that in our recommendations, I don't want to be too detail oriented at this stage. I would leave it broader. The committee's got to delve into areas that we've taken no testimony on at this point. I think that what we have right now, information technology support, is needed to ensure that legislative reports and deadlines are accessible to the public. You can deal with the issue of accessible to the public in a timely manner, and instead of all legislative reports, that key legislative reports and deadlines are accessible. Yeah, basically, we have a challenge of making too much information available in a way that is impossible for anybody to digest and read. And part of this is getting to the point and doing something that's meaningful.
Thank you, Randy. That's helpful for all of us to continue to remember. It's hard because we've sort of uncovered just a bit, and we're anxious to get it all done. And that really is the committees of jurisdiction's responsibility. We're bringing up some of the really big issues, and we are all welcome, as I'm sure our House and Senate Government Operations Committees will say, to go in and testify and say the things that, you know, after doing this work, the things that are really important to each of us. And I will make sure that our chairs know that as well. So, but they have a lot of work to do to hear testimony on some of the things that we just weren't able to get to.
And we have to recognize, I think, also that the committees of jurisdiction have limited time as well. And I think we want to make sure that we don't give them something that is too big for them to eat and digest, and then to have this whole project delayed because we find ourselves immersed in detail.
Agreed. I want to be sort of find that middle ground, that sweet spot where we don't take this as serious as we possibly can, because we want to keep it so simple that it doesn't sort of whet their curiosity so that they do dig deeper. But on the other hand, not be overwhelming and feel as if this is just too big to do this year. So I'm with you, Randy, 100%. But I just wanted, you know, we have to find that middle ground, that balance.
I think the middle ground we have to find is we have to help them avoid the temptation to form another committee to go into the detail that they don't have time to do.
True. Okay. What do you think? Can we move on to 6 or? You know, we'll have another bite at this. This is just to get Tim, to get us to the next draft.
Mhm.
And I just want to say the verb thing, I know, Wendy brought that up at the meeting the last time too, and I 100% agree. So Tim, that's really important that we start with the verb on everything. And this is really action oriented for our readers.
Okay, I will make a note to update it accordingly.
Okay, let's go to 5. Is that right? Okay. Yes, I think it's helpful if you just read through it. It reminds us all about what's in there.
Absolutely. Number 6, the 6th recommendation is once a bill becomes law, there needs to be a broader communication process. The legislative branch should take responsibility for communicating to agencies and Vermonters alike what is available to them and/or what has changed in law that will have an impact on their lives. For example, changes made to Act 250 or benefits cliffs.
Here, I just feel like I have to say something because I helped write a lot of these and it was, anyway, I'm not going to apologize, but what I'm trying to say in this piece is something that Wendy brought up in, I think, one of our first meetings about the importance that our agencies don't have a chance to communicate what our legislative intent in the legislative branch, and that it's important that happens. So the example that Wendy talked about, I think a little bit, and I can't remember if it was just with me or with the whole committee, was around Act 250, that there have been some really good changes, but nobody in the field, or not that many people in the field, really know about them and are using them to their benefit. And I felt the same way about the benefits cliff legislation that we passed that I talked about, which was where the kids are not, or families that aren't accepting a raise because it'll send them over the cliff, but don't know that they can put that money aside and still accept the raise, but not price themselves out of the program, state programs. And so this is more what we're asking for is a communication process that makes sure that the people that are impacted by programs that we pass are actually are getting the information in order to be able to take advantage of those great laws that we all work so hard on. Anyhow, is there Wendy, you have, yeah. I think you're muted. No?
The numbering on the detail part is different than the numbering on the summary, and I think this is why I had the my suggestions were under IT, but they shouldn't have been. The information technology explanation on page 3, that the description is actually for number 6, which is once a bill becomes a law, there needs to be a broader and more timely communication process. So we need a number 6, a new number 6 in the detail portion. Do you see what I'm saying? Because number 6 right now is put aside a certain percentage of time on issues of accountability, which is actually number 7 on the summary.
Okay.
So that's just something that needs to be fixed.
Yep. Tim.
But then, so my comments would go under the new number 6, the communication, not the IT. That's where some of the confusion came from.
Okay, it looks like that has been fixed. 6.
Oh, I may be looking at it. I'm looking at draft 2.2. So maybe you saw that.
I don't know. Tim knows. He's been
I
keeping
can
us.
make sure to go in and make
Okay.
sure that everything properly matches in the future.
Great. Thank you.
And Tim, thanks for editing in real time in front of all of
You're
us.
welcome.
Yes.
That's,
That's
my
true.
own
That's hard to
nightmare,
do.
and I hope we can all offer you grace while you're doing
Yes.
that.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Randy.
I keep going back to, I think, a theme that I've been repeating, and that is, as you look at 6, the broader communications process, about changes. Take the benefits cliff. We talked about notifying people of what's in the issue about the benefits cliff and the fact that once you reach a cliff, there are various things you can do and so on. Brevity is so very important in communication, because otherwise we're going to send people a 900-page summary of each of the things that we've done that no one will read, much less understand. And the key is to be able to get to the point as to what the major changes are. And it's much harder to write something that's short than something that's long. It could be footnoted. It could have references that people could go if they want to get the detail. But the key is to be able to write something that summarizes briefly and to the point the things that are really important as to what these changes mean, and then reference people so that they go elsewhere to find the detail.
And Randy, I 100% agree. This was put on here so everyone would remember, oh yeah, that's what I said, or oh yeah, this was just the first document, and I wanted to be sure that there was enough written underneath it that I could remember where I picked that up or why I put that in here. I can't tell you, to me, that the first part is what we really want to do. That first thing where Tim put it, succinctly, and there's the bold, absolutely 100%. Don't want to have all of this, especially an examples like this, because no one will understand why that's there. So I totally agree. Does anyone disagree with what Randy's saying right here?
Not in the slightest.
Okay, good. So simplification is
I think clearly communicate what we mean by this to the committees who are going to be receiving our report.
Okay. Tim, we can talk offline about that if you want. I think we can wipe out a lot of the material under the bold. We just want to make sure it makes sense.
Sure.
Okay, next.
Well, I see you have some other hands up.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see Irene. Sorry.
That's okay. So I'm kind of aware that the reason we might think that we passed a law and communicating that to people may not be what the law does to impact them. For example, Westford this week on Tuesday rejected $4 million for a new wastewater system strictly because of S100. They see it changing, taking over their ability to specify what would go in that space in their town, and they want to preserve the common. So not all towns will reject that kind of money with such a deep understanding of what's in a bill. But that bill was never sold, that I heard, by anybody in the State House as a cautionary tale to anyone who wants to add wastewater and public drinking water. So I think we need to be really careful when we summarize a bill as this is about housing. This is all about, housing people affordably and about providing housing for people who want to move here or stay here. There's always sort of the dark side of the bill that people are going to recognize. And I think we need to be careful to be transparent about what those unintended effects might be, because they're real to the people on the ground. And when they read the actual bill, they're not always fooled. And again, I don't mean to be cynical, but this is happening in real time, that people are not believing what we think we passed, or in my case, I didn't pass it, but it passed overall. So I think when we summarize the intent of a bill, we need to be really aware of all that bill might mean for people on the ground. And, S5 is another one. Thanks.
No, Irene, I 100% agree with you. I see that in our town around the clean heat. And so that's actually, I'm not sure exactly. I get where we're headed with this number. Once a bill becomes a law, there needs to be a broader communication process, is more about the really, I don't exactly know, and would love everyone's help on this, it's the honest to goodness change that it makes, like not anyone's opinion of the change. Do you know what I'm saying?
I don't think we're going to be able to parse this much deeper today. Because I think we all do sort of know what we mean, and the nuance of that is, I think, the reason that it doesn't actually happen. And the reason that Legislative Council is generally nervous about summarizing a bill, because it's almost impossible to do it comprehensively or neutrally. Sorry, I just jumped right in without raising my hand.
No, thank you. So maybe can we keep it just the bold part? Once a bill becomes a law, there needs to be a broader communication process, not so much on its intent, but on the real change. I don't know how to. I don't know. Just leave it highlighted or something, Tim, so we can get back to it. And if anyone has any thoughts, please send them along about how to do that.
Just one quick thing, if we could say broader and more timely communication process.
Okay, yeah, I heard that in your, good.
Thank you.
Okay, let's keep going.
Recommendation number 7, committees should be committees should be encouraged to put aside a certain percentage of time on issues of accountability. Committees should be encouraged to set aside time for program design and debriefing. Committees should review major outcomes and lessons learned from the state-funded and legislatively required work, investments, and costs associated with the effort, and how the work can be used to inform future decision-making. The data may also help prioritize program budgets. Committees are encouraged to think in terms of 3 subpoints. A, should this committee pivot or amend a program when the performance data is showing little or marginal success? Should this committee persist with a program if the performance data is showing it is having the intended benefit? Should this committee perish or pause or some other term the program if the performance data is clearly showing little or no change?
Okay, this is a big one. I don't know. Advice, counsel, what are we? Yes, Emily.
I think this is the piece that seems in most way in the closest to the carryover of the old Government Accountability Committee's charge, and continues to be. I think the reason that it didn't work is because it wasn't systematized. And so, I mean, yes, I think getting into, I think the detail of A, B, and C is quite negotiable. And I certainly have a lot of wordsmithing I would want to do if this was if A, B, and C were gonna go through. And
Okay.
I think the first paragraph, the lead paragraph, is really important. We're still not being clear. So putting aside time is different than systematizing time. I might want to connect it. I think maybe saying that it should be prioritized time-wise, and connecting to our other recommendation around the Joint Fiscal Office's renewed capacity, sort of systematized and supported with staff from the new accountability office, because just setting aside time with chairs who have very different capacities for this kind of accountability work, I think puts us in the exact situation that we're living in right now.
Okay, Randy.
When you say to committee chairs to set aside a certain period of time, which is probably their most limited capacity, I think just the way it sounds to a committee chair is perhaps not what we might want. If we were to say something to the effect that in passing a bill, committee chairs should ensure that such and such and such and such is an integral part of the consideration prior to a vote, or committee should do that, rather than they should set aside a certain percentage of time. That seems very prescriptive, and I think you will get resistance.
Okay, I like that. Did you get that, Tim? I like that. Others, I agree that this felt very prescriptive when I was, writing and thinking about it. I think what we really want to make sure is that committees are looking back before they move forward, that they make sure that they spend some time looking at past legislation that is very similar. And you all remember all my examples of, how to do that, examples of where we're not doing that and how to move forward. Okay. Josie.
I should say I agree with you. I think it's really important, especially with such a new and young legislature, that we spend a little bit of, I agree with Randy though, that it does feel prescriptive, but from my perspective, it would have been really great to know what the Ag Committee had previously done, what reports were due, and to have a little bit of time to look at those reports as a committee to help us figure out what bills we wanted to take off the wall and sort of see how they were doing. But I'm not sure how to balance both things that you're both bringing up, because they're both really good points. And that's why you two are co-chairs.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've heard. Anybody else want to say anything here, and then we can take a shot at rewriting this? Wendy, sorry, I don't see.
No,
everyone,
I just put it up.
Okay.
Just one idea, because I understand the challenges. We might want to suggest that we take whoever's going to do this, take a step back and talk to the committees or whoever they need to talk with to find out why it's so hard to find out and share information on what's already been done, and just to understand the root causes of the issue, of what we perceive as a problem. And I completely agree that it is a problem. It would be very helpful to know what was already done before you do something new. But we might want to have our suggestion be to have the government operations or whoever do some digging into what is the cause of this problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I get what you're saying, and I agree. I think that it's nice to have Emily on this committee because she's a chair and has been involved in GAC, and so gets a little bit of those, I think, or a lot of it of those root causes. So, but I agree that that's the whole idea of the Government Operations Committee, right? They should be looking into all of the things we list here and trying to understand how they're going to impact committees and members and all of that. Matt, what are you thinking?
Sorry, what I guess I'm trying to get at in these, or we were trying to somewhat, is that there is no systemic process. There's no requirement to look at or to review the things that were passed and what happened in last year's committee or the year before, or the laws that were particularly passed. There isn't a process that requires any kind of review on the legislative committee framework. It's up to the chairs to set the agenda, et cetera. We went through some of that, but somehow we're not conveying the essence of the rush to move forward to the next thing without any oversight that the administrative piece has been followed through on the legislative intent. So we're trying to convey some kind of systemic improvement for the structure of the committee system that requires a review or a backward look. And I'm not sure that we're quite doing it. I don't know how to do that exactly, but.
Thank you. I mean, that's right. What you just said is exactly what I was trying to get at. So that makes me feel like it's there somewhere. And this is good. I think Tim and Randy and I need to just do what Randy wants, which is simplify, but make sure the point gets across that we're really saying, we're asking committees to review what came before they move forward on things we know there is a before. There's certainly some bills that get introduced that are not, maybe we haven't ever passed anything in that area, but that's how come Leg Council can be incredibly helpful to committees.
Well, on that idea that we're tracking everything that was passed, or we're trying to encourage that some group is tracked everything that shows the reports, And then it's divided by committees of jurisdiction. Here's your things that have happened since then, whatnot. We're trying to provide that information of what happened, what are the reports that are due, this part about the IT support and supporting that JFO piece. If we produce that, then we're trying to then sort them by some level of committee of jurisdiction and have them reviewed, I think.
Yes, yes, but the problem is that some of that is just the year before. And I guess what this is saying is, hey, if you're going to pass a new big housing, if housing is one of your priorities in your committee, then make sure that you look back maybe 5 years and see how it's been going. What have we passed in housing? Do a real legislative review on the various things that have happened, and then try and understand what's already been tried and why maybe that didn't work. Is there a way to fix that? So some of that will come from reports and those sort of things that we're gonna structurally change the systems that force us to look back. But then some of it is just that committees think about that ahead of time. Like next year, we're going to really focus on housing. So I'm going to talk to Leg Council in July and ask them if they can pull together a legislative review of what came before. So we're trying to capture, I think, those two type things. But thank you, Matt, and Emily, is that a new hand? Yes.
I think the danger of getting too specific is, well, for one, say Ways and Means actually would need to look at all of the legislation because we get reports for every committee. I think that's true of appropriations too, and is appropriate in some cases, but there's only so many things that fit in a day. Or my committee looks regularly at the results of Act 60, which passed decades ago. But there's not a lot of usefulness in looking at corporate tax reform that might have passed last year because we can't see the implications of it yet. And so it's not that we can't look back at the entire body of statute every year, and looking at last year isn't always helpful. Or if we think about justice reinvestment, which was a huge piece of judiciary legislation, that's actually working on a 20-year timeline of results. And that's true for a lot of our work. And so I think if we get too specific in this recommendation, we're in danger of losing its power because it's, as I think Senator Brock said, it becomes sort of an overwhelming task and no one will listen to it anymore because it's sort of too big and too instructional.
Agree. Okay, so we got a lot of great feedback on that one. So let's keep going. Number 8.
Recommendation number 8.
Is that the same? No, sorry. Go, Tim.
Sorry, yes. Let me toggle the markup so it reads a little bit more clearly. Recommendation number 8, committees should be encouraged to review past legislation, legislatively mandated reports, study committees, etc. 3 subpoints. A, an individual legislator or member of the Joint Fiscal Operations teams, who is responsible for ensuring that required reports have been submitted on time, are delivered to the relevant committees, and are reviewed and discussed in committee meetings. Subpoint B, encourage or require joint committee meetings to review and debrief legislatively mandated work to provide legislators with a common foundation and maximize efficiencies for those being asked to testify. Subpoint C, a process by which current acts, previous legislative proposals, and any relevant data are reviewed before considering new legislation to promote a culture of continuous quality improvement. For example, in 2024, the House Human Services Committee plans to work on legislation that would ban all flavored tobacco. But first, it will look back at previous vaping legislation and ask questions like, how is it going? Is legislative intent being met? If not, why not? Then, with that information, the committee will review any new legislation.
So is this the same as 7? Seems so.
Yep.
Does the committee like this better?
Well,
Go, Randy, no problem.
the only thing that perhaps should be added to this is there needs to be a mechanism to ensure that all the people involved have actually read the reports, because that isn't happening now. You know, again, people are overwhelmed with stuff that's been delivered, and what is really important or potentially useful is to summarize that information in a way that people can digest it. You asked me to go and read everything that's been done on housing, for example, in the past 10 years, and all the reports associated with it, and so on. It's not going to happen. I don't have time to do that, and most legislators don't have time to do that. It's
Right.
nice, but it's not going to happen.
Right. I do think that you have, I don't know how others feel, but I've noticed that we've changed the way we're writing legislation to not just ask for a report, but to actually say a report isn't necessary, but a summary of folks coming into our committee and telling us how it's going. And that works so much better. It's
Yep.
So, but again, some of this is about leadership and committee chairs thinking about those questions. We can't, it's hard to put it all in writing.
Yeah.
So do people think 8 really does do what 7 asks for? And if you do, maybe just raise your hand so I'll know and we could just delete 7. Okay. Okay, good. Okay. You don't have to do that now, Tim. Let's just keep going.
The 9th recommendation is explore a mechanism that allows the appropriations committees to follow up on last year's budget bill, asking questions such as, have the funds been spent the way that was intended? If not, why not?
This is something that was asked by the Appropriations Committee to put in our recommendations. They're trying to figure this piece out by the House Appropriations Committee. Sorry, Wendy.
I just had a relatively minor suggestion, I think, which would be to add the institutions and the transportation committees, because they're the committees that deal with how. Actually, I don't know why Ways and Means doesn't want this, but whatever money committee wants this, I think should be able to get it. And I would just suggest that we have the last 2 years, because then we would have a complete year and the current year, which would be very helpful to start looking at trends.
So maybe we just say the money committees. I don't know. Is that too? Yes, Emily, help.
The Ways and Means Committee doesn't spend money in the same way those other 3 committees
right.
do.
Yeah.
So I don't actually think it's necessary to have the Ways and Means Committee do that. And the transportation, the institutions budgets do go through the Appropriations Committee eventually. But I think it is helpful to say like all 3 committees that look at budgets could do it.
Okay. And then would the capital budget also be, they do this. I think they've come up with their own mechanism. This is really a mechanism that allows the money committees, I'll just say that for now, to look at trends and be able to ask specific questions around that. Okay, let's work on it. How about 10?
Recommendation number 10, explore a mechanism that makes it possible for committee assistants to keep track of all deadlines. Discusses these deadlines as a part of scheduling meetings so that the committees can be encouraged to review rule changes and reports from the administration, state auditor, and federal government. There's a need to prioritize follow-up on these rules and reports.
I feel like this one's really clear. Okay, it looks like nodding heads. How about 11?
The 11th recommendation is legislation that is a priority and costs more than a threshold dollar amount should be required to have a performance note. Performance notes would include, so points A through G. A clear statement of legislative intent, overall goals, and changes anticipated. B, data that needs to be collected to measure results and evaluate whether the statute is having the intended impact so that the legislature can make more informed future decisions. C, the target changes and how these are to be measured. D, description of expectations and timelines for these expectations. E, designated entity, preferably one that is independent, that will be named responsible for data collection, monitoring, and reporting back to the legislature on the progress associated with the policy changes and or investments. F, when an entity is responsible for data collection, monitoring, and reporting back, description of the financial costs associated with the additional tasks in relation to the total cost of those legislation. G, when a new legislatively mandated study, commission, or work group is created, a template should be made available that informs or requires a certain makeup of members, including a strong emphasis on representing individuals with lived experience relevant to the legislative intent. I'll pause there.
Emily.
I love this. I also think we should use the term nonpartisan, not independent. I think independent sounds like something outside of the legislative branch, and nonpartisan refers to our staffing capacity within the branch. And I would even go so far as to say a designated legislative entity, preferably one that is nonpartisan. Thanks.
Wendy. And then Irene.
Yeah, this is a great section. At the beginning where we say legislation that is a priority and costs more, I think we should say or costs more, because there is legislation that's very important but doesn't have any cost. And then I had a couple of suggestions which might be too specific, but I just want to keep them in people's heads. One is to just, when we look at a new program or even existing programs, just identify the customers of the process or the program. I think that's very important when we look at performance and goals. And then a second recommendation is that when we're considering different specific legislation, that we work with the executive branch agency that will be charged with implementing the legislation. That possibly should be in a different under a different number, but I just want to get it into the mix, because we have discussed working with the legislative with the executive branch, but we haven't put it into our recommendations yet, as far as I could tell. I may have missed it.
Okay, and that's testimony. I think of both of those areas as the importance of hearing from them. I'm a little bit confused how we put it in the legislation, but Irene and then Randy.
Thank you. I was looking at the order of the first couple of bullets. A seems to be in the right place for me. You've got your intent, and then I wondered if D should be the next one, because now you're going to describe your expectations and timelines. And then C would be third. You're going to talk about the changes you're targeting and how those are to be measured. And then comes the data. You can't collect the data until you know what your changes are and how you're going to measure them. So I just thought it would flow better if we talked about all of our general statements and then talked about the data that we're going to measure all those things by.
Like that
Good.
a lot.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff I'm like.
Also, in the former B, the data bullet, that whole section after impact to me seemed a little redundant. You're just going to see if it has the intended impact. I think it's intuitive that the legislature can make changes if you need to that, if it's not.
So which one was that? I'm just
The
looking.
new D, data,
Okay,
after the word impact, I wondered if we could take the rest of that sentence out. If it's, I think it's kind of
Yeah.
understood or redundant. Thanks.
Mhm. Good.
good. Randy. Or did you have more? I mean, sorry.
That's a good start. Thanks.
Okay.
I'd like to go to 11E, this where we now have marked a designated legislative entity, nonpartisan, and so on. I am concerned about that language. The language that we had before that referred to an independent, I think is much more important because the notion you can have groups that are nonpartisan that still has a dog in the fight and are not independent in terms of their review and in terms of the information that they provide. Second, I don't know that it should be a legislative entity. We use the auditor's office as a classic example of an independent auditor or an independent entity that looks at information to report back as to whether or not we're achieving the results that are intended. I don't know that it has to be a we certainly hire outside organizations and entities to do similar kinds of work. So my sense is that nonpartisan isn't important because independent means nonpartisan. Nonpartisan is included in the term independent. And so I would strike legislative entity and I would strike nonpartisan and put back independent.
So Randy, and I'd love to, I think Emily might have a question too, but my question about that is, aren't we then saying that we must go outside of in other words, we can't use joint fiscal and we can't use
I think joint fiscal is independent. I consider joint fiscal to be independent.
Oh,
Oh, okay. I didn't think of it that way.
In
Emily,
other words, I'm looking at people who do not have a vested interest in the outcome. That's what I'm looking for here.
so should we say that? What do you think, Emily?
I think
Sorry,
the word
and Irene. I
independent
don't know.
in typical use of these kinds of reviews, that's what independent means.
Emily?
Tim, I don't want to put you in the middle, but I'm about to. What does independent versus nonpartisan mean to you if we put this in legislation?
They are ambiguous terms, so I would suggest that they be defined as much as possible to avoid any confusion. If the committee arrives at a certain meaning, whether that be nonpartisan or independent, I would flesh it out a little bit. Recommend the committee does that, not me personally. But
Well, I think we could certainly add some definitions as to what we mean by independent. But I think it is in the term independent, certainly in my interpretation, is broader than nonpartisan. Nonpartisan does not necessarily mean that they're independent because they may have commonality in terms of their hope for the legislation to achieve certain results. Independent means they don't have a dog in the fight and they can focus specifically on the result and measure it objectively without influence.
I get what you're saying about not having a dog in the fight, but I also don't want to, I feel like you're taking aim at maybe a little bit of an entity that's already in place and measuring, and how do you prove that you don't have a dog in a fight, but you have an interest in it being independently reviewed and that you understand the background, anyhow, I'm just processing out loud. I have to think more about that, but
well, when we think of Ledge Council, when we think of JFO, when we think of the auditor's office, these are all organizations that I consider independent.
Right, but the auditor's office isn't going to monitor data for the child care bill or I just,
Sure.
I think,
Now, I bear in mind that I'm not saying that the review and reporting about results may be different than the collection of the data associated with gathering. You're going to get the data from the organization in all probability, and the independent organization may have an evaluation as to whether or not the data is good, whether or not it's accurate, whether or not it's presented timely. But they aren't necessarily doing the evaluation of the results. That's the difference.
okay, Emily, do you have, I have to think.
For example, the classic example is when I look at the Department of Labor reporting about how their unemployment system is working, I don't consider that typically independent.
No, right. Right, I agree.
I agree with all of what you're saying, Senator Brock. I am concerned that the word independent precludes our internal staff capacity. And so I just want to make sure that we find a definition that includes our internal staff capacity.
Can you give me a sense, Emily, when you refer to internal, can you give me an example of what you mean that independent would cause a problem with and impede your ability to get information you're comfortable with?
So the word nonpartisan means to me sort of what our JFO and Legislative Council does. When I hear the word independent, I just think of independently elected officers outside of the legislative branch. It's just my experience of those words.
Yeah, and then that's not what I intend, and perhaps Tim's notion of a better definition of that may be important.
And so I think that we could find a definition of either of those words or both of those words that meets the needs that we both have. And I'm going to leave it to Tim to do that now that he's heard this conversation.
You could certainly say independent, nonpartisan. I'd be comfortable with that.
I just want to make sure that independent doesn't preclude what the folks inside, or isn't interpreted to mean the folks inside our legislative branch.
Yeah, I'd be comfortable with independent, nonpartisan. One, I question though designated legislative entity. The implication there is it has to be something that is part of the legislature, which I don't think is intended. If you mean an entity designated by the legislature, that's different.
We could say that, a designated entity proposed by the legislature. What do you think, Emily? And Irene, I want to hear from you too.
I don't want us to wordsmith this now. I want us to have had this conversation and have Tim figure it out.
Okay.
Here, and maybe not even having to type while we're watching him type.
Okay. Okay, Irene.
I was going to second Randy's comments, and I'm fine with a legislative entity or an entity designated by the legislature.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay, let's move
Thank
on.
you.
We're running out of time, precious time, unfortunately. I think the next section is review New Mexico's legislating for results, and that's obvious that we all were interested in that. And all that A through H is just the things that we spent some time really reviewing. So I can go through and make that smaller, and we could make that an addendum even, Tim, that A through, or a footnote or something, that they know what seemed pretty interesting to us as a group. And then 13 is education for all members. And this is, we've all talked about this a little bit, and we've tried this. Because we turn over so quickly, it's hard because we get there in January and everybody's off to the races and they have their own ideas of how they were elected and all of that. So this is important. And I'm hoping that the government operations committees could take a look at this and really, and A and B don't need to be there. It could just be education for all members relating to what it means to have an accountable government, interpretation of data and measuring outcomes. In other words, they need education around, if we're going to do these performance notes, well, how do you do that? And we'll need for everybody, there'll be be interpretation of data. Senator Brock has told us many times that there's all different ways you can look at data. So you need to really understand that. And Emily knows that we've spent a lot of time trying to do that with the legislature over the last 8 years. But I think love to hear your feedback, but I also want to make sure we get to Emily's memo that she sent us. So this is really, I think everybody agrees on education. Irene, your hand's up. Is that for this one? So I'm happy to hear what you're thinking.
It is, and this is similar to the change I suggested a few minutes ago. I'd like to educate members as to why they would want to even read this document and follow these procedures. So I think 13 needs to be somewhere closer to 1 or 2 in the grand list of things at the start of this memo. Because once you're educated on why this is important, then you say, oh, how could we be better accountable as a government? But sticking it at 13 to me seems just really too little too late. Thanks.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Okay. I like that. And why is it important isn't even in that list. So I like that. Not just the mechanics, but why? Why do you care about government accountability? That kind of thing. Okay. Others. Looks like Randy, you're going for the hand.
I guess I'm fine with this provision, but what we really mean, I think, and maybe we should articulate a little bit, is we need to embed the concept of accountability in everything we do. And a 1 hour or 2 hour program of education is not going to do it. And it's how you embed it in all that we do. That's what's important. So that it becomes an integral part of the committee process, an integral part of how chairs approach what they do, an integral part of how bills are passed. That embedding that concept is what's important, and how you achieve that. I'm not sure that education is, and I'm not sure how to actually articulate that, but that's what we mean.
Yes, I agree. And honestly, it'd be great if, Randy, if you want to think about that a little bit more. If you look at the second paragraph at the very top of this whole thing, is recommendations strive to be simple, clear, independent, objective, and fact-based. Enhancing the legislature's government accountability efforts should be systemized as much as possible and not reliant upon individual legislators or individual committees to be exemplary in this regard. But we could put that there, at the very top, something about this sort of vein running through all of us, right? As that we're all trying to keep that in mind as we serve our constituencies. Do you agree, Randy or Senator Brock? Sorry that I'm not using your official names. I'm sorry.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay, let's think about that. We'll think about that some more. Okay. Are we on the last one? 14 overall staffing for the Vermont. Okay, so this is a bigger one, right? What do we want to? Overall staffing of Vermont's legislative branch should be considered when making recommendations to strengthen accountability. Based on the 2021 research from the National Conference of State Legislators, Vermont has the 3rd smallest legislative staff during session. Insufficient staffing capacity may limit the legislators' ability to use data to inform policy. So we all know this. This is the whole, but all we're doing is making a statement. Probably maybe that goes at the top too. I don't know, but it's more letting government operations know that they have to really think about this piece, that none of this can be done without looking at staffing, because everyone is already working overtime to get the work done. So when you add a bunch of new things, it'll be tough. So Emily.
I think the intersection of 13 and 15 is really important. And I don't think either are quite as specific as I would like to be. I felt like at our last in-person meeting, we had some pretty solid agreement that we were making like a recommendation about staffing that can do the work in 13. And I don't that like, an office be expanded, staff are hired to do this work. And I don't see that explicitly reflected here. It feels a little softer. That's so essentially it's like, think about the things we thought about. And so I would like to move to like a tangible recommendation around essentially like the creation of a New Mexico style office.
Okay,
And maybe that is a combining of 13 and 15, or maybe 15 is also, I think 15 is also important because I think we actually just like need more attorneys to be able to do this well. So I think 15 can stand alone, but I think 13 needs to be strengthened to include a recommendation around hiring and creation of an office.
and
And
it's 14, right? Not 15?
sorry, I'm looking at the old version. Excuse my
Okay.
notes.
No,
Yes,
that's okay. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something.
you're
that
not. I'm talking about, yeah, 14.
Okay, so would you be willing to work with me on trying to do that to bring to our next meeting so that I think that would be helpful, as well as others, to get us any other things that you don't feel like we talked enough about, or that I might not give full attention to, so that we don't miss anything. And a couple of us, a small group, can get together and try and clean these up for our next meeting. And let's go to Emily, if you want to present to us this memo, which, do you have that, Tim, that you could put it up? Oh, good.
Yes, let me.
The only other thing, just in case all of a sudden everybody starts racing out, is the best day to meet again looked like December 13th. But one of the things, some people have a lunch meeting on that day. So we would take a full hour at lunch. And we'd have meeting in the morning and meeting in the afternoon. But it looks like everybody can do it that's responded to the doodle poll. So we're going to go ahead and put the 13th on the calendar, if that is good with everyone. Okay. Okay. Emily, let's do this.
So folks, this was sort of an attempt at a path forward, given how really incredibly important charges 2 through 4 are for our really like our state to function, and for volunteerism to work, and for us to have an inclusive representative government. And so essentially what I did was talk about the importance of this, summarize what we've learned thus far, and moved it to in the form of recommendations for essentially what the Government Operations Committee should pick up next time. So included all the important data that's sort of comparative and best practices from other states from NCSL, the recommendation from the Office of Racial Equity, and really just tried to emphasize how much we think the Government Operations Committee needs to be thinking about this. And that is that.
And so if we agree with this, and Josie, your first step after this, if we agree that this works for our recommendation to the Government Operations Committees, this has been sent to Susanna, who we heard from, Susanna Davis, and she is going to be at our meeting on the 13th along with others to talk about this. So we could always put a little more in if the committee thought we should. But this really explains why we don't have the ability in November to move forward in the way that I think we would love to be able to move forward, that it's really up to government operations. And they could ask us to do it in the future, or another committee, or they could just do it. And that is what we're thinking. And I will reach out again to Susanna Davis and talk with her about it as well. Okay, Josie.
Emily, I really like this. My only question is, I'm remembering what Susanna said and her anger in a way about not being roped in sooner. And I guess my question is, I want to make sure this isn't a soft handoff to GovOps, but a firm handoff. So they will actually commit to going ahead and doing the work. And that the only thing that makes me nervous is I don't know how full GovOps committees are already and what they're looking at for the rest of the session or the whole session. But I want to make sure that this work, we're tying someone to doing the work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand Susanna's frustration. I don't know if I would characterize it as anger. And we can't tie any committee's responsibility to do anything, but I do know that at least the House Government Operations Committee is really committed to diving into this. That's actually why they asked for recommendations. And I think we really highlight the need to include and the importance of including the Office of Racial Equity in this work going forward. And included all of the recommendations that they offered to us in doing the work and their support in doing the work.
Cool.
Randy?
I would just like to make sure that we have clarity that the mission is to ensure that we have broad and equal opportunity for everyone in Vermont to participate as members of boards and commissions, rather than solely groups that self-identify with particular groupings or identities, as opposed to all of Vermonters. That all, I think, is imperative that we focus on.
Emily?
Randy, I agree. Did you see language here that precludes that?
I see a focus perhaps on certain groups and self-identified groups as opposed to all Vermonters. I think that,
okay.
When you, as you take a look at working with boards and commissions to explore reforms, just the nature of the selection of those that have active conversations are not necessarily as broad as I think they should be.
Okay. I love recommendations and other ones. So for me, the folks that I've had the longest conversations with about this are actually farmers that serve on the Climate Council who felt like they didn't have time to be participating fully because they needed to farm and were not compensated for their time adequately, given the emphasis, like given the sort of the workload of being a farmer. But you wouldn't know that by reading the Climate Council there. So I think recommendations of other groups that we know are working on this would be great.
Irene, sorry.
I think that one of the things, groups are one thing, I think individuals are another. As you reach out for people to serve on boards and commissions, people don't have to be members of particular groups, whether they be affinity groups or occupational groups, in order to serve. And in terms of reaching out to the public to advise people both of the opportunities and the desire to have broad representation of Vermonters filling these positions, that is I think something that we should emphasize as opposed to simply group identity.
Irene?
I don't disagree with what Randy just said. I would point out that I don't see the fourth of our charges addressed in this or the other document. So I would just say, let's not forget this finding mechanisms to control and restrain increasing numbers of commissions, for what that's worth. And just throughout this document, at the end, we abbreviate ORE, but we don't abbreviate it on page 1. So just some consistency. I'd love to abbreviate everything we can. So if we could say ORE in that first paragraph, then we can continue to say it throughout. In paragraph numbered 2, the last line talks about those people, and that just struck me as kind of a slur. If we could say such people from participating, maybe it's just me, but I read those people as those people, and we have enough of that in these prejudicial times. Thanks.
Determine what prevents such people. Yeah, I like that.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Let me just suggest just people.
okay. What?
Just people.
Oh,
that prevents people from participating.
That works too.
okay. Um. Okay, so maybe there's a sentence at the top that we could say something about ensuring that we have broad and equal opportunity from all Vermonters. I don't know, where is given the limited time available to the mandated deadline, the profound recommends that those were their words, 1, 2, and 3, right? Is what was in the legislation. So there's nothing we can change there. Let's go up a little further, Tim. Okay, well, we don't have to wordsmith here, but let's think about Randy, your hand is up. Did you want to?
I have another subject. If you want to finish this section, I'll bring the other subject up after we finish with this.
Okay, I think that we can work on this in that little group as well. In a little group.
Okay.
Okay.
That's
Why don't you go on what you'd like to say?
One of the things that we've talked about regarding this group is accountability and oversight. This is almost entirely silent about oversight. We haven't talked about it at all in this document. And I think we should, if we believe that that's something that also, as we kind of look forward, not just to what we're recommending for the committee, but are we recommending that a government accountability committee or a government oversight accountability committee be created and as a lasting entity to continue this work and make recommendations to the committees of jurisdiction going forward, and also to look into, investigate, and provide oversight of issues that are relevant to this. Now, I know we talked about that, but we haven't added any fur to the beast.
Great. And I actually, before we went online here, I wrote down on the top of my little thing, are we recommending a committee that or not? And so that's a good point. Randy, maybe you could put that into writing and we could all talk about it at the next meeting.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Is everyone good with December 13th? I just want to, everybody's nodding.
Works
Okay.
for me, yep.
Good, Josie. Good. Matt, I can't see your face, so maybe he's not there.
Okay.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so that day, the morning will be spent with Susanna and the afternoon will be spent on hopefully getting to a point where maybe we could vote on these recommendations going to, if we don't totally get there, we could, I talked with the speaker and we could, the first week of the legislative session, we could have a lunch, together and vote there if you want to, and ahead of time, we would send the final changes. So it's not like huge pressure, but it would be nice if we could finish up on the 13th. Yes, Emily.
Can we please really aim to finish up on the 13th and have a final draft that we're voting on then? I think the chances that we're all going to be able to get in a room together the first week of the session is pretty darn slim.
Yeah, I agree. And so
also a lot of pressure on, like, it's nice to wrap up before in mid-December so that people can transition their lives into the session.
Okay, yeah, no, I agree. So I will try and get to everyone a new set of recommendations based on today's discussion a week before the 13th, if not sooner. And that way everyone can take a look and be ready for the afternoon part of our meeting on the 13th so that we can move through hopefully pretty quickly, maybe even take a break, and Tim will be able to update some very small changes we make and then we can vote. But we'll see. Okay, thank you all for doing this. I know that we sort of quickly had to shift and schedule, and I appreciate it so much. I guess that's it. unless someone else has something.
No, it's good.
Okay, let's go off live.